Evolution is only a scientific theory, but is widely accepted as what truly happened because of the evidence. Evolution is a theory that has stood the test of time and held up against all doubt. There are still holes in the theory, which is why it's still under fire today, but there are far more amounts of decisive evidence proving than disproving it. One piece of evidence is that there are homologous features from different species in different parts of the world from totally different times in history. These different species have homologous features that have all come from common ancestors. The reason they aren't all the same is because each species has evolved and adapted to different environments, and due to natural selection, they changed. Species that live in similar environments that are different because there are many ways a species can adapt but still flourish. Different species had to learn how to evolve and survive in the ever-changing world where temperatures increase and decrease and land splits can happen suddenly. To explain sudden changes and possible gaps between different species, punctuated equilibrium is where a sudden mutation changes the species rapidly. Furthermore, we can see evolution in present-day bacteria and antibiotic resistance. Lastly, anti-evolutionists like to point out holes in the evolutionary theory. However, they cannot explain the holes either. To really disprove the theory, anti-evolutionists must have a better explanation for the holes that are backed up by evidence too. All the evidence and lack of a better concept outweighs the holes and proves evolution is true.
Evolution has been a heated debate for many, many years. Most people think that it has been proven, but they would be wrong. Evolution is still a theory based on evidence. Yet that evidence isn't thorough enough to prove it through. There are many holes in the theory, such as missing fossil records, information on the first cell being unknown, different species and different time periods being alike. Thus, because of a lack of important information, one is unable to prove evolution, since nobody can even say what the first cell even was. Without the first cell being known, how can an evolutionist prove that all species are somehow linked to one common ancestor? If evolution takes place, there should be species with progressive change, but missing fossil records prove that there is no link between certain species. How can a species evolve if they all died out? Both these questions remain unanswered and exploit huge holes in the theory of evolution, which is why this theory is just a theory to this day.
There is only one fit design possible for the environment, which is why the animals, such as dolphins and sharks, are similar. They come from different lineages and different time periods. The shark came into being 300 million years ago, and the dolphin came into existence 100 million years ago. Yet these two species are similar. Take the dorsal fins in both the species. They are similar, even though of the huge gap in different lineage. The only way this would be possible would be that this is the only design possible. There's no other design that would be able to fit.
There is not only one design possible, as suggested by homologous structures present in animals, where two structures may not be the same but have the same function. Take, for example, rats and frogs. They are both four-limbed creatures. The structure of their arms and legs are the same. They both walk on their limbs instead of being bipedal like us. Their arms both have wrists, fingers, elbows, and shoulders. The fact that they have the same arm structure suggests that even though they are from two different environments, they came from the same ancestor.
Evolutionists cannot explain where the first cell came from definitively or why there are gaps in the fossil records. But how does an anti-evolutionist explain these holes? To truly overthrow the theory of evolution, one must have an explanation for the holes in our theory that is supported by fact and evidence too, especially when trying to disprove a theory that supports many other sciences such as physics, chemistry, and obviously biology. One must have a better explanation that is backed by facts and connects as much as the evolutionary theory does.
By definition, a theory is just alive as long as there is no facts to disprove it. Just one piece of evidence can disprove entire theories, such as like the first cell origin, which is a huge thing which cannot be explained since no one even knows where it came from. So how can evolution be based off of that?
All things come from something else according to evolution. So where did the first cell originate from? It cannot have appeared out of nowhere. There had to be the first origin. So how can evolution be based on something that nobody knows how it came into existence?
The origin of the first cell is unknown, but we are still in the process of learning. Evolution is still yet a theory, and there may be much more evidence we will uncover. Still, to this day, we are still learning about how the Earth was in its early days. Current studies suggest the first cell developed in vents under the sea, which provide a perfect environment for large molecules, which is an ideal setting for the current RNA world theory to occur, which states that protocells first used only RNA, later changing to using DNA for information because of its easily reparable structure.
The picture shows the different species and how long each one lived for. Yet there are clear gaps such as the Sahelanthropus canadensis to chimpanzees and bonobos. There is no fossil record indicating how these species emerged. Also, from Australopithecus anamensis to Australopithecus behavioralizali, there is no connecting species to link the two. This clearly shows how the fossil records do not have enough information to clearly justify the gap in the timeline. You guys claim that punctuated equilibrium is true, yet evolution isn't something that happens in a year or two. It would take several generations, but there are gaps in the timeline, which disproves the fact of evolution. It also doesn't skip from species to another species emerging later. There has to be a transitional species. Since there's no transitional species, one cannot say that evolution occurred, because there would be no relation between the two animals.
Many anti-evolutionists argue that evolution could not have occurred because of the gaps in between species. However, this can be explained through punctuated equilibrium. Punctuated equilibrium is a model showing how species can evolve more suddenly, which is why there could be gaps in between species. The model states that some mutations occur to a species, completely changing one aspect. This leads to different species sharing a common ancestor, who could still be alive, but the mutation happens very suddenly rather than evolving over time. The sudden change can make it seem as if there are holes in between species, but really, the lost species never existed. The change was just rapid. Human species are defined by the differences in between them. There is variation in between each species, but they are different enough to be different, but similar enough to share a common ancestor.
Antibiotic resistance proves natural selection and is a present-day proof of evolution. When a person becomes sick, it's usually because of bacteria. To fight illnesses, most people use antibiotics to kill the harmful bacteria, and it usually works. However, some bacteria can survive if it has a gene or genes that are resistant to that antibiotic. These bacteria that survive live to keep multiplying, and by binary fission, they make more bacteria with the same resistant gene. In binary fission, the bacteria replicates the DNA, which has the resistant gene. So bacteria without the resistant gene are killed, and thus cannot make any more bacteria without that gene. Every time a person uses antibiotics, however, the bacteria gets more resistant and more survive, thus more multiply and more get the resistant gene. This is why doctors are always having to make the medicine stronger, such as penicillin.
This is only due to mutations. Mutations occurred in large amounts, so that's why it was passed on. Just because a mutation occurs doesn't mean that evolution is necessarily occurring. All it means is that it occurred in large populations, which changed the genetic diversity. Thus, when the bacteria underwent binary fission, this gene was passed down, creating antibiotic resistance. This would just be a mutation and nothing more.
Completely different species have homologous structures in bones, organs, and etc. that prove there must have been a common ancestor. Two species, the rat and frog, have very similar organs. The organs that are present are in almost every living creature, and each organ is in around the same part of the body. For example, both the heart and lung are connected in the rat and frog, and the digestive organs are placed in almost the same order. The reason they're different was because they had to evolve and adapt to different environments. The frog lives in water, and the rat lives on land. One trait in an animal could have proved more useful than another, and could lead to a species surviving due to that trait, therefore passing it on to the offspring of the species, and gaining the species' traits and characteristics entirely. Beneficial mutations that occur can also help if a species is mutated that makes the animal smarter or live longer to reproduce and pass on the mutation. Species that do not evolve to fit a certain environment will die quickly, and natural selection will take over, where the most suited for the environment will continue to survive and reproduce. For example, an elephant could not live in a rainforest because it would be noisy, clumsy, and unable to blend into its surroundings to avoid predators. On the other hand, a leopard easily survives in the rainforest because it's nimble and can get around quietly, and blends into the surrounding environment to hunt its prey. The elephant would die off very quickly and stop reproducing, but leopards continue to grow and populate, and it would keep evolving to better suit their environment.
8. While that is true, how come the goldfish and the whale shark are totally different? They live in the exact same environment, yet they have different features. Based on your statement, they should supposedly have the same features since the environment plays a role. Thus, they shouldn't be such widely diverse. They should have been the same.
Everything goes towards chaos eventually, according to the second law of thermodynamics. On top of that, this law has not been disproven by any system, only proven by multiple ones. Fruit flies got mutated through chemicals, and evolution states that mutations are part of evolution. Yet in reality, mutations go into disarray while evolution makes species more organized. These two things are unable to go hand in hand due to the fact that they are going in opposite directions. The fruit flies end up dying off thanks to the mutations, and nothing good occurred from this. Things only got worse for the fruit fly population. This supports the law of entropy, since the fruit flies just went into disorder and destabilization due to the mutations. Yet evolution tries to go against the second law of thermodynamics and say this will become more organized, while this law states that even the human race will eventually fall apart as every living thing tends to obey this law. Evolution goes against this entire law, meaning evolution cannot be true since this law hasn't had any holes found in it.
Not all mutations that occur will induce evolution. Some mutations, such as cancer, are very harmful and can kill a species. Furthermore, most mutations that occur are harmless and do not create any drastic damage. Rather, the successful mutations that occur are the ones that help a species evolve. One example of a good mutation could be the one that changes the color of an animal to better blend into its environment. For example, the Galapagos finches were observed during droughts and rainy times. Many of them have different types of beaks. In the droughts, those with larger beaks survived. During the rainy times, the birds with smaller beaks survived because they were able to pick up small seeds.
Such as said earlier by Shivani, the sharks and dolphins have many similarities. And this is not due to the environment, because natural selection cannot be true. According to Darwin, the environment plays a role in changing/evolving species. The environment doesn't change a species. It might alter its eating habits or food sources a little, but it doesn't give them better abilities to cope with its surroundings. The environment did change humans and animals, and genetic drifts would evolve us. Yet, even with Pompeii, which happened in AD 79, and the Japan tsunami, which was just a few years ago, and the Antioch earthquake, which was in year 526, it would have led to the evolution of life. And because each of these events killed more than 250,000 people, and two of the events were more than 1,500 years ago, there would have been some type of evolution or new feature that would have been added, yet there was none to be seen. A bottleneck or founder effect would have happened if this were true, since more than a quarter million people were being killed, which was a lot of people back then, since the total population was already 206 million people. The new population would have been isolated, and the newly created gene pools would not have been the same as the originals. Also, important traits could have been knocked out, which would have affected the future generations, yet there was none to be seen. The Byzantine Empire still thrived after the earthquake, and the human race continued onwards. Even with these major events occurring, no evolution occurred, proving that genetic drift cannot be true, since natural selection would have been altered, since some good genes and possibly a useful gene would have been wiped out, creating a mix of genes to be passed onward. Yet no change was seen. Natural selection would have ended up choosing strong, dominant genes to be passed onward, and over time, though the new gene pool would have been strong, would have been full of strong, dominant genes. However, there were also unsuccessful genes that are showing up in genes pools. And by natural selection, only the successful ones should have shown up. And the human race did end up thriving and moving forward, disproving the fact of genetic drift, which means that the environment didn't affect us or animals, and also disproves natural selection, since unsuccessful genes are also passed on, and animals would not have been endangered since natural selection would have chosen a stronger gene that would have enabled them to survive. The human race did not evolve even with the genetic drift, proving evolution does not exist.
The amino acids would have been unable to rescramble their code without new genetic material. If there was only one species in the beginning, then according to genetic variations, there would not have been any new traits. There was no new material for these amino acids, yet there are still different features present in modern times. This shows that there is a higher power controlling the development of abilities and not the environment. The new genetic material had to have come from somewhere, and these events are not chance. It is all controlled by a higher power that is governing what should happen. An evolutionist might say that these mutations are random, and some of them create a new gene that helps them better cope with their surroundings. Then this gene is passed on due to natural selection. Yet as stated earlier, bad genes are also passed on as well, which many times kill the host. Also, these good mutations are all planned by a higher power. These mutations are essentially programmed into our DNA. The mutations do not occur by chance. A higher power governs this and helps to ensure our survival.
There is no proof of a higher power. Even if there was a higher power, there is no scientific fact that proves it exists. To disprove a theory, you must use an explanation that has fact behind it. The most popular explanation is that a God created the world and everything on it at once perfectly. However, we know it's not true because of fossil records that show the different species lived and died at different times in history in different layers of the earth.
In frogs and rats, there are also analogous structures which help reinforce the theory that evolution is not real. The carpals in rats and tarsals in humans, which are basically the place by the ankle, are different in structures, yet they serve the same purpose. Both of these features enable the species to walk. This shows how this was the only design possible because it enabled them to walk and run properly.
While there are analogous structures, there are also homologous structures. Almost all species have fingers or sort of finger. For example, humans have 5 digits on their hand, whales have 4 bones that support the fin, and bats have 5 bones that support the wing. These are all very similar structures, and the fact that they're so similar but live in very different environments suggests that they had a common ancestor.
Point 10. The development of the frontal lobe is only due to the need of more information. The environment had nothing to do with this. The design had to change.
This was because there was only one design possible, yet the design had to change due to the necessity of more information, as stated by Shivani. The higher power realized that this design did not work out very well. This caused a change in the frontal lobe since survival was indeed necessity.
There may be a higher power, but we cannot justify anything happening because of it due to the lack of evidence. There may be evidence later to prove a higher power does exist, but as of now, no one can say for certain this being made us bipedal, have opposable thumbs, or have larger frontal lobes, since there is no real fact to the statement.
Evolution theory suggests that the frontal lobe began to become larger after humans began to think more. After discovering fire, their frontal lobe increased as hominids discovered how to use fire to their advantage. The frontal lobe also evolved as they began to learn to make tools. They began to think about how they could use the tools at their disposal to their advantage. And those beings that thought more were more likely to survive and reproduced more. Above everything, evolution is still a theory. There will still be skeptics and holes in the theory. But evolution is widely accepted as what happened. It is accepted as true because of the evidence. Darwin's theory of natural selection has been observed by us in the present day. Human evolution is backed by the numerous similarities observed by the humanoid fossils. Numerous species, who are from different environments entirely, share the same structures for their skeletons. Granted, we don't know where the first cell came from, and there are gaps in the fossil record, but we are in the process of learning. We are still evolving and learning about our human body, and we will definitely uncover more evidence for evolution.